Steven Nelson is clearly not happy with his contract situation. Are his Texan days done? If so, how will the cornerback room look after his potential departure?
You are Locked On Texans, your daily Houston Texans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to a Thursday episode of the Locked On Texan podcast, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Shout out to our everydayers from the Himalayas. I see y'all tuning in every Monday through Friday or every other day as of right now. But if you are new to the Locked On Texan podcast, be sure to subscribe, like, and comment to the Locked On Texan podcast wherever you get your podcasts, including Apple Podcasts and Spotify, along with YouTube as well. I am your Texans football analyst, John, some sports guy Hickman, and of course on the other side of that screen, none other than Sports Illustrated's own and Texan Credential Media member, Cody Davis. We will talk about training camp. The date is set July 26th.
I can't wait.
We'll end off with that. Look at the potential cornerback room if Steven Nelson does indeed, well, if the Texans go ahead and move on from him, but if the Texans and Nelson depart ways, but we can't talk about that without mentioning right now Steven Nelson, as Cody has, versus Nick Caserio in a 24-hour span. Steven Nelson has been having his type of fun on social media, tweeting the photo of Damian Pierce and Hannah McNair, calling it cringy. He also tweeted all this hype to miss the Super Bowl cap. And he also ended off with it gets personal. Then there is the Instagram post that read, can't trust a person, and he didn't say the word person, but can't trust a person that wear these every day of the week, clown freak, with a picture of a blue vest, which we know Nick Caserio is notorious for wearing. All of these seem to be referencing the relationship with the Houston Texans front office and the state of the franchise in one way or another, specifically taking shots at Nick Caserio. With the addition of Shaquille Griffin, Cody, what are your thoughts about Steven Nelson? And looks like some contract issues and beef with the front office and Nick Caserio.
Let me be clear. Nobody is telling me this as of right now, but I think Steven Nelson's time with the Houston Texans may be coming to an end sooner rather than later because, John, I don't know how you go on a social media tear the way he has been over these last couple of days, and you not only bring him back into the building, but you give him a contract extension. And this is part of the reason why, ever since the signing of Shaq Griffin, I have been keeping my eye out and just been so fascinated about that signing because that signing came 2 or 3 days before Steven Nelson had an opportunity to hire an agent, which means that was already in the works. And then we started hearing rumors and reports, and, you and I had an opportunity to talk to a few people who, confirmed it that, yeah, Steven Nelson is looking for an extension. He would like more money, more years. And like we have been saying every time we talked about this situation, he deserved it. He was honestly, arguably the best cornerback that the Houston Texans had in 2022. However, everything from OTAs, mandatory minicamp. You guys heard me say this almost every single day now over the last 2 weeks. Shaq Griffin was taking first team reps. Steven Nelson spent majority of his time on the side watching. Now you consider this. I don't see how you bring him back to this organization, especially when you go back to DeMeco Ryans' press conference when he said something along the lines that he doesn't want any type of blood-sucking vampire sucking the fun or something like that out of this organization. That is exactly what this is. And when you consider the fact that when you look at the coaching hire of DeMeco, look at the coaching staff that he has brought in, how they have literally revamped this roster and actually brought some talented players in, everything about this organization is new. The circus, the sideshow, the cloud that's been over this franchise, it has been gone for over the last couple of months. And I just don't see no way that they bring Steven Nelson back, because if you do, that's going to draw the negativity back on the Houston Texans.
Honestly, I don't think it'll draw too much negativity. I don't
Well,
think
well,
Steven
now I
Nelson.
say negativity only because that's going to be the so-called circus that's going to draw a lot of the negative attention that the Houston Texans have spent over the last year, especially these last 6 months, been cleaning up.
Yeah, we look at the start of training camp coming up July 26th. I think that's funny that we are mentioning that and talking about that on today's show, and then opening up with Steven Nelson, because going into training camp, the battle was Steven Nelson versus Shaquille Griffin. And now I don't think we get to a point to actually see that battle take place for this franchise, because I don't think Steven Nelson returns. I think Houston may look at potentially trading him and maybe getting something back, regardless of how you may feel about him. Now, Texan fans, last year, will I say he was the best? Well, in terms of pure talent, I think Derek Stingley still has that. But in terms of performance-wise
Yeah,
and
performance-wise.
consistency and being on the field, we both said it time and time again, Steven Nelson was arguably your best cornerback last year, and I think that he was. Right, and so maybe they shop around and say, hey, we got a guy we want to move on from, behind the scenes trade talk, and see if they can get something in return for him. But if not, I can see an outcome where Houston just flats out release him, right? And I think that
Really?
simply because in the past, I still think he would have gotten released. But I think that with D'Amico Ryans, there's no question. I mean, I don't know the relationship between Ryans and Steven Nelson, but I don't think that going into his first training camp, the issue of coming back, that's not a problem. We want you. He probably wants him to come back. I know he understands as a player, you want to get that new contract, you want to get an extension. The thought of having to, compete for your number 2 spot, okay, well, that's a part of football. I don't think that bothers D'Amico Ryans in that, that aspect. I think the way he went about it is an issue, right? And it's clear as day. I'm going to say allegedly he was taking shots at Nick Caserio. I'm going to put, I'm going to say all of the things that kind of clear it, but I think it's clear as day that it was a shot at Nick Caserio. I think the Damian Pierce and Hannah McNair, that was a shot at the franchise. And I think that all of the hype with no chance for a Super Bowl cap, I think that that was also a shot at the franchise, because there's been a lot of hype, but do we think this team is going to go to the Super Bowl? So Steven Nelson right now, I think he has an attitude of somebody that either I want to be paid to stay here or just move on from me. And this is Ryan's first year, and he wants guys that are going to be 100% invested after today. And when we look at Tuesday, that's not the case for Steven Nelson anymore. I don't think so.
Well, maybe he's at the point where he just wants to leave, because even if he just wanted to get paid, like I mentioned, his actions are not showing somebody who, one, wants to be with this franchise, and two, everything is going to be kumbaya once you pay him. And then two, most importantly, I didn't get the last tweet about all this hype to miss the Super Bowl, because yes, everybody's excited about the Texans, but nobody in their right mind has the Texans going to the Super Bowl.
I don't know. He got some responses back from the fans.
I just don't understand that at all. But, John, I agree with you. I don't see a situation where they bring him back. If they do, maybe they could work something behind the scenes, which if that is the case, they could work something behind the scenes, fix the relationship. That will let me know that the guys who are in charge of this organization now, especially the coaching staff, especially with D'Amico Ryans, is more equipped, because we've seen a story like this time and time again with the Houston Texans in the past, and it never ended in a way where the relationship between the player and the franchise was repaired. So maybe that could be another situation where we say, man, maybe D'Amico Ryans is definitely the coach for this organization as of right now.
Yeah, I think we are confident in him being able to stand on his own and handle the pressure of a disgruntled player. I do want to mention before we move on, because if Steven Nelson is not on this team, then Houston does have an opportunity to either upgrade or build in-house, which we'll get to. But as of right now, if they decide to trade Steven Nelson, they will save $4.6 million in cap saving if they decided to just outright cut Steven Nelson, then they will save $3.8 million in cap saving as well. So between the 3.8 to 4.6, I think Houston have opportunity to potentially upgrade if they choose to, which we'll talk about more on the other side. Take your first swing at betting MLB on FanDuel and get 10 times your first bet amount in bonus bets up to $200. Right now, just take $20 and you'll land $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. That's $200 you can spend betting everything from the money line to the over-under to who you think is going to get the first home run. All on an app that's safe, secure, super easy to use. Plus, when you win, you get paid instantly. There's no better place to bet on MLB and all of the MLB action than FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. So sign up today. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get up to $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com/LockedOn. FanDuel, the official betting partner of Major League Baseball.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. And of course, in the first segment, we talked about the potential departure of Steven Nelson, and it's kind of looking more and more like a real possibility. John, if Nelson depart, I'm automatically expecting Shaq Griffin to win the starting role. Once again, when healthy, this is a guy who has already been a Pro Bowl caliber player at that position. And I think that's also going to open up the door and opportunity for guys like Tavierre Thomas and Desmond King to continue to be the reliable cornerbacks that they have been for this organization over the last 2 seasons. However, you got somebody in mind that you truly believe Steven Nelson's departure will actually be beneficial for not just him personally, but also for the Houston Texans.
Well, yeah, like how does the potential Steven Nelson controversy affect the Texans depth chart without him? You got Derek Stingley, you got Desmond King, you got Shaquille Griffin, who you signed in the offseason, you got Tavierre Thomas, Darius Phillips, Kadar Holman, D'Angelo Ross, excuse me. Between Phillips, Holman, and Ross, a total of 73 games has been played, with Holman and Ross each missing a full season of football or not getting an opportunity to play cornerback. So a lot of special teams, right? Compared to Thomas, Griffin, and King, who has a total of 243 games between the three of them. One group has the experience, the other group does not. I was shocked when Houston didn't address the cornerback position in the draft, honestly, but at that time I understood given what we knew about the team then, but with the Nelson controversy and him possibly getting released, I think there's 2 options. Right now, you got 4 cornerbacks going into the season: Stingley, King, Thomas, and Griffin. And for me, there is serious question marks surrounding Griffin in terms of his injury. And when he was on the field, he was very underwhelming for the last couple of seasons. One option. So with the new cut down rule in the NFL, where teams can reduce, where they have to reduce the roster from 90 to 53 in one day, depending on how strong that pool of players is, I think it'll be smart for Houston to evaluate the cut down day. And if there's some strong players in that pool, go ahead and grab them. I also would keep my eye on William Jackson III or maybe Jason Verrett, 2 players that are coming off injury. William Jackson was traded from the Commanders to the Steelers last season, but he was released in March after not playing any downs. His last couple of seasons with the Commanders, watched the football at one point. He played very good, and Jason Verrett is a very low-risk, high-reward type of player. He's just a guy that cannot stay healthy. But your second option is Houston can really see what the value they have in former 5th-round pick and former Bronco Darius Phillips. If Thomas plays more snaps this season with the loss of Nelson, then I like Phillips being able to step into the special team role. Last season, Thomas played 153 special team snaps compared to Phillips 125. So you're not getting too much of a drop off there, and you're going to need somebody to get off on kickoff return and punt return. But Phillips gives you an element that Thomas doesn't. And that's being able to be more of an outside cornerback, which is needed if you are replacing Nelson. Desmond King isn't leaving, so Tavierre Thomas, I'll get to that. When we look at Phillips, he accounted for nearly 480 snaps logged at outside compared to 8 in the slot. Thomas has been very good for Houston, primarily as a slot cornerback. Going back to the 3-year run where Phillips saw the most action between 2018 and 2020. Phillips did not always start, but as a guy that was a fourth corner, maybe a fifth corner, was slightly impressive. 15 games where he did not start but played as a rotation piece for his respective franchise at the time. 228 yards total allowed, 15 yards per game in those 15 games. Very effective considering he only played in 30 or more snaps 4 times. So again, I'm not looking for a replacement for Desmond King. That's what Javier Thomas is in terms of being a primary slot guy. He's been very good for Houston in terms of playing football, but he's been around that slot position and has rarely played outside. I'm looking for somebody that can come in and replicate what Steven Nelson was able to do. And if Thomas does get bumped up that depth chart, which I mean he would, you got somebody you can replace him on special team, and you have somebody that doesn't need a bunch of snaps for you to see his value, right? I think that for Phillips, in his time in the NFL, with the limitations he's had throughout his up and down career, 1 year he's playing and starting in 12, 15 games. The next year is 8, then he's sitting out. But when you look at Phillips, he's a guy that, okay, Thomas may need a breather. Stingley may need a breather. Griffin, between Stingley and Griffin, those guys may need a breather playing on the outside. And Phillip has that experience. He's been good. I think he has 5 career interceptions, 4 in 1 year. Only played in, I think, 10 games that year. He had those 4 interceptions. And you don't need a lot of snaps for him to be effective. You can go out there and play 25 snaps. You're going to get the best 25 snaps out of him. You can go out there and play 35 snaps. You're going to get the best 35 snaps out of him. So Houston has the option of looking in-house, right? This is what training camp is for. And it's important that we talk about training camp now because training camp will be before the initial black, Tuesday, Wednesday, whenever they have to cut down from 90 to 53 players. So at that point, from a roster standpoint, from a coach standpoint, from a front office standpoint, okay, let's see who we have in-house right now. That way, we already got a guy under contract. We don't got to go out there and spend no money if we don't have to, unless it's a true upgrade or it's one of those shocking releases that makes your team a whole lot better at that corner position. Save that bread and give a guy a shot who has had some success in the NFL, especially considering that if everyone else steps up in their depth chart, he will be your 4th or 5th rotation piece.
I like everything that you just said, and you kind of sold me on the idea of giving Darius Phillips an opportunity, especially when you pointed out the fact that he's more so of an outside corner. I love the pairing of Derek Stingley and Shaq Griffin. I think that's a unkept secret at this point, but both of those guys are injury prone, and if anything happens throughout the season, keeping a guy like Phillips on your roster would definitely give you an insurance policy. I believe in Javier Thomas and Desmond King, but we already know what their best attribute is. We already know what they can do when they're at their best. So I think you sold me on the idea.
Well, and also let's look at, I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but with Javier Thomas being he's played, I only think he has played a total of 15 snaps outside, right? In 2 years, maybe. Compared to Desmond McKean, who, he is better at the slot playing around that box, right?
Yeah.
But he's played some outside, right? And I think it may depend on matchup, who's on the outside or what formation the offense is coming out in on the opposite side of the ball and how they're trying to get these matchups. A lot of dependence. So I'm still looking at a guy that we need for you to come in, and when you do come in, you're not allowing consistently big plays. We can kind of trust you a little bit in certain situations. William Jackson III, man, I really do like him. And to have a little fun with it, he's one of my favorite corners on Madden right now that I use. But Jason Verrett, again, those are 2 guys, injury history, injury problems right now, especially Jason Verrett. But if they're healthy and you can bring them in for a camp workout and see what they can do, it may still help to keep Darius Phillips on until you're comfortable maybe with putting them out there. And I think Jackson is a guy who, by the way, I want to say William Jackson is from Houston. So if he is, shout out to the kid. But if he goes out there and as a free agent plays very good football, then you can just, bring him back for the following year, address the cornerback position in the draft. But then that allows you to maybe move on from some of the guys that you want to just kind of move on from. I don't know who that is, but, money-wise, it could help. So those are two guys that I will keep my eye out on. But who's to say that Darius Phillips, who is a 6-year vet in the NFL and has had some success, wouldn't be good for this franchise? Welcome back in, Locked On Texans listeners and viewers. Really quick, William Jackson is from Fifth Ward. Went to Wheatley, high school teammate with Xavier Howard. So he is a Houston kid. And again, I think that he's a Houston young man, but I think that keeping an eye out on him in terms of his health-wise, I believe he's recovering from a back injury, something along those lines. It could be another, bring him home, man. Literally from Houston, again, he grew up in Fifth Ward, went to Wheatley High School. Shout out to Fifth Ward, to Wheatley High School. But in terms of football-wise, it would make sense. Training camp is set to begin on July 26th. Cody, I think that's Leo season, so we're going to see if Houston got some lions and dogs and bears and, some of them animals on the roster, 2 weeks away, 2 or 3 weeks away from the first preseason game. But training camp, man, like how exciting is it this year compared to last year?
So this will be our official third training camp. No, third, because the first one we wasn't there. We wasn't credentialed at the time. The first one was in 2019. So, and we were still trying to find our way and stuff. That's when people used to be saying some terrible stuff to us, especially me on Twitter and the DM. But this is officially our third training camp. And wait, is it the third? So the first year was the whole Deshaun Watson was out there on the field playing scout safety, and is he gonna play? Is he not gonna play? It was all of that. Last year, it was more so along the lines of, instead of going into training camp, looking at players and even looking at the coaching staff and thinking to yourself, how in the world is this team's going to get better? It was more so which players will have an opportunity to stand out and be a foundational building block for this organization moving forward, i.e., can Davis Mills take that next step and be this team's starting quarterback moving forward? Unfortunately, we know that did not happen. But another i.e., Dameon Pierce, can he automatically take the helm as this team's number one running back? And of course, without a shadow of a doubt, he did. This year, it feels different because I'm not looking at it from a standpoint, or we're not looking at it from a standpoint, because, John, you're going to be out there sweating. Oh, my God, it's going to be so hot out there. Lord have mercy. Coach got these practices starting at 9, which means they probably won't be over until 11:30 on most days. It's going to be so hot. But this time, when we are out there watching the Houston Texans go through their training camp practices, I'm not going to be looking at it from a standpoint of which players is going to have an opportunity to be building blocks. No, I'm looking at it from a standpoint of which players are going to stand out to help this organization win more games in 2023. That's my primary focus, because, look, I understand this organization, this team is still somewhat in the early stages of its rebuild, but they cannot afford to go through another season where you win 3 games or 4 games. No, this team has to be better, especially with the better quarterback play in CJ Stroud. By the way, you talk about what's to look forward to. I want to know the improvements that CJ has put in his game within this month that they're supposedly taking off, which is my favorite part of being credentialed, because you could kind of see growth in players of what it was doing OTAs, doing mandatory minicamp. And within this month, when they go through their own individual workouts, you can definitely start to see the growth doing training camp. I can't wait to see it.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things I'm looking forward to for training camp because essentially training camp is the same, but
Mm-hmm.
for Houston, um, that energy, real energy, with expectations, and man, I just want to see a lot of the first and second year players kind of like you said, what have they did from training camp to mini? I mean, from rookie OTAs to mini camp and now training
Mm-hmm.
camp. But for the second year players, man, how much better are you than this class that just came in, right? Because this class
Oh,
got
that's
your,
an
your
interesting
franchise
point.
saving quarterback, your eventual what you're hoping for in franchise defensive lineman or edge rusher. Um, who else was in this draft?
You have, I wouldn't necessarily call them franchise, but two wide receivers that can definitely be reliable and
Yeah,
valuable,
you got the
keeping the
tank,
depth.
you got the Xavier Hutchinson. So you got some guys that you got Jared Patterson at center. You got some guys in this rookie draft class that, quite frankly, can steal the show in terms of the oohs and the ahs, but just maybe better football play. So I'm looking at this sophomore class. Stingley, we need you 17, 15 games, right? DP, we need you. How much better have those young men gotten in the NFL? And we'll go from there. But I am excited for training camp because I think this year just to have a lot more energy, and I think it'll be more fan involved.
And you know what else? I want to add this in really quick. I'm just looking forward to just a normal training camp because this is going to be the first time, especially since
I
you
think
and
that's
I've
what
been
I'm looking for.
around.
That's what I'm looking for too. Like,
Like just normal. There's no sideshow, no circus, and it kind of goes back to what we opened the show with about the possibility of them bringing or not bringing Steven Nelson back. Because look, like I mentioned, our very first training camp, it was the introduction to the whole entire Deshaun Watson stuff. Last year, even though Deshaun was gone, it was more so Jack Easterby still lurking around. Yes, Lovie Smith brought a little bit more credibility at the time to the organization, but everybody knew without a shadow of a doubt that he wasn't going to be the coach come training camp of 2023. So it was kind of like, okay, when do we start writing his burial, whatever you want to call it? Like, this is going to be the first time where training camp for the Houston Texans is just going to be about football and football only.
yeah. By the way, Steven Nelson woke up this morning and said, "Great morning." So cause chaos. And then you wake up. This is a good morning. Thank you guys for checking out today's show of the Locked On Texan podcast. Be sure to subscribe, like, and comment as the screen says at the bottom to Locked On Texans podcast. Wherever you get your podcast, and especially on YouTube, and make sure you follow us on Twitter at Locked On Texans. Give me a follow as well at John_Hickman12.
And as always, I'm your host, Cody M. Davis. Please remember to follow me on Twitter at Cody Davis_24. Once again, that's Cody, COTYDAVIS_24. Until next time, ladies and gentlemen, peace.